Today we celebrate the feast day of Saints Eleutherios, the Hieromartyr, as well as the martyrdom of his mother, Saint Anthia. As I'm sure most are aware, Eleutherios has the meaning of freedom, and freedom is something that we are very concerned about in this day and age. When we think of freedom, we think of our personal choices, our choice to go in and buy one of 20 different kinds of toothpaste, our ability to stay up and stay out as late as we like, to do what we want, essentially. So often we consider these things freedom from a very young age. And yet we must ask ourselves, is this truly freedom? Are we truly free? Or are we perhaps in many ways held captive by those very choices by which we seem to demonstrate our freedom? Are we free? Are we free? Or are we perhaps entrapped or even enslaved to the comfort that all of those choices give to us? There's a sad story about a man who was taken captive during the Cold War by the KGB. And he was preparing and readying himself to be beat up, to be tortured, to maybe even be brainwashed. And the officers didn't lay a finger on him. And as the day went longer and longer, he was wondering when the torture would begin. And he finally asked one of the officers outside the door, and the officer told them, "We don't need to hit you, we don't need to beat you, we don't need to torture you. Another day without a cigarette, and you will tell us everything you need to know." We are held captive by these very freedoms. And yet, Saint Eleutherios and his mother demonstrate and show us and reveal to us the true meaning of freedom, which is so different and in many ways almost the inverse of the world's. Saint Eleutherios and his mother were early Christians living in the early part of the 2nd century. Saint Anthia, the mother, was in fact one who in her youth had heard the voice of Saint Paul himself. Shortly after giving birth to Saint Eleutherios, her husband died, and so she raised him as a widow. But she raised him with such love and piety and faithfulness that while still a teenager, he became a deacon. 18 years old, a priest, and in his 20s when he was actually made a bishop. He spoke so eloquently, so beautifully, that many people were becoming Christians. And finally, out of concern that these Christians were turning the world upside down, he was held captive and he was brought before and questioned by the Emperor Hadrian. He lost, seemingly, his freedom. All of the little wealth he had, his choice to get up or to go to bed or to do what he wanted was taken away from him. He was imprisoned, seemingly without any freedom. And yet, he was free of that slavery to comfort and to ease that most of us suffer from. In fact, he was free even and ultimately from that overwhelming desire or even instinct we have for self-preservation. St. Nicholas Kavasilas tells us that they could take all things from the martyr, they could take their freedom, they could take their health. He says they could even take their head, and yet they could not take Christ from them. And so St. Eleutherios shows us what true freedom means. And his mother, upon seeing the martyred body of her son, ran into the arena and embraced, not out of fear or even sorrow, but that she might be the first one to venerate the relics of her son. And she herself was put to death. And so here we have, perhaps, if there is one instinct that is deeper, if there's one part of our human nature that's even stronger than that self-preservation, it's the preservation or the desire of a mother to save her child. And yet even this, St. Anthia shows us that she is free of, and that she is willing to allow her son to be offered as a sweet-smelling offering and sacrifice to our Lord. And she too was free and gave her life freely to our Lord. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you all through the prayers of St. Eleutherios and St. Anthia.